Newsstand comics are all the rage and have been for the last few months and certainly for the last few weeks, with several high-grade copies of newsstand comics going for insane amounts of money. But here's the thing. There is something out there that is even more rare than a newsstand and may potentially be hiding right in plain sight if you're lucky. If you're curious as to what I'm talking about, I want to encourage you to stay tuned for the video. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. As you heard in that brief intro, newsstand comics are all the rage right now, and I think that there are several reasons why that is the case. The comic book and collectible markets, generally speaking, are on fire. Added to that, you have high-grade newsstand copies that are going for crazy amounts of money. So it is like fuel to the fire. And part of the reason why these high-grade newsstand copies are going for crazy amounts of money is because they are rare. It is rare to find a really high-grade copy of a newsstand comic out there in certain years. And I say that because if a comic was on the newsstand, that means that it was out in the public domain, and the public had the potential to handle and mishandle that comic, basically introducing all kinds of defects. So if a comic is a newsstand and was introduced to that type of distribution and still commands a 9.8 grade, that is something to be acknowledged, right? That's part of the reason why these books are rare. It is also important to mention that as the market went from newsstand to direct, it was a gradual transition. And I actually have videos here on the channel that talk a little bit about the differences between newsstands and directs. It wasn't a complete switch from newsstand to direct. And so in those years where newsstand comics were in the minority, that is specifically where those books tend to be worth more money, especially in high grade. Now, what's interesting is that at the beginning of the transition, as the market and the method of distribution went from newsstand to direct, at that end of the spectrum, there was a type of direct comic that was introduced that was extremely rare. Again, during that transition from newsstand to direct, that transition was a critical period because there is something that is called a Whitman variant. And technically, Whitman is like a generic term for different types of comics that were polybagged in those early days and were distributed directly, not via newsstand. And depending upon who you believe and what reference you look at, that Whitman variant represents about 5% of the overall comics that were distributed during that time. So they are rare. They are essentially what newsstand comics were in those later years as the market made that transition to the direct market. And so potentially when you're looking at those two ends of the spectrum, the Whitman comics on one end and those rare, equally rare newsstands on the other, both of these comics represent a potential opportunity for some explosive growth. And we are certainly seeing that with the newsstand comics, which are easy to identify. I want to read a passage to you from a blog post that was on Go Collect that kind of, allow me to wrap my mind around this concept. And I'm actually going to link to it in the description so that you all can read it as well. But this was written by a blogger by the name of Harry Stone III back in February of this year. And he wrote, from February 1977 to May of 1979, Western Publishing and others began sporadically distributing bagged direct edition comics distinguishable from their newsstand counterparts. These direct editions made up 5% of the market or less. Comics from this period have a diamond price tag on the cover as opposed to the typical rectangles. One of the things that complicates this matter when you think about Western comics, or I'm sorry, Whitman comics, is that a lot of people believe that these are reprints. Based upon the information that I've seen, these are actually not reprints. These were comics that were printed at the exact same time as those that were placed in the newsstand. They just had a different way to illustrate the price for those comics versus the newsstand version. And I actually spent some time digging in my own collection to try to find some of these books. And I can tell you, it was a little bit of a challenge. Again, if these books truly do represent at the beginning of that transition from newsstand to direct, 5% of the market, these are not easy books to find. The other thing that complicates this is that those books that were distributed didn't always look the same. And that is part of what complicates things just a little bit. But with that said, I went through my collection, well, parts of it, and I tried to identify some of these Whitman variants. And I found a nice stack of them, not a huge stack, but a nice stack of them. And I can tell you for a fact that as I looked at these books, only a couple of them are probably in high grade. And again, because they were distributed in poly bags, that means that they weren't necessarily, the best care wasn't necessarily provided for them. And then people over time have thought that they were reprints. So they might have also mishandled them as well. The first book that I want to show you is from my run of Amazing Spider-Man. This is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 184. And again, this somewhat looks like a newsstand because it has a UPC down here, but in this upper corner, what you can actually see is that there is a diamond there with the price and with the issue number and issue month. Again, 35 cents, 184 in September. This is one way to kind of identify those Whitman variants from other comics that are distributed. Another copy that I found was this one, and I'll illustrate for you why a lot of people think that these are reprints. This is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 180. And again, you can see that same diamond price up here, but down in this corner, you can actually see that there is no Spider-Man head. There's no UPC symbol. And so a lot of people felt that these are actually, reprints, but they're not. Again, they were printed at the same time as the regular version of Amazing Spider-Man that would have had a UPC symbol down in that corner. Digging a little bit deeper into my collection, I found a copy of Eternals, specifically Eternals number 14, that has that exact same diamond shape up there. This one actually has the UPC down in the bottom corner. And I actually have, in some cases, copies of these books that were newsstand that have a different logo on the top. And I'll maybe try to show some of those on the screen if I can dig them back out. Next up, this one is slightly different from the other. Again, there's a little bit of some inconsistency in what is called the Whitman variant because they were not always treated the same. And you could see that here. Similar kind of diamond shape, but there's like a little burst behind this one. And again, you have the white empty box in this corner. This is Avengers issue number 179. And certainly you can do a search for all of these books online. You can find a lot of details here. And certainly if you search on mycomicshop.com, they actually have a nice list of some of the Whitman variants that are out there. Most of them are not in stock for you to be able to buy, but at least you can see photos of some of these books that I mentioned and many more. And then the next stack that I have here are all essentially the same. It's all the same book. This is Micronauts issue number 1. And with this one, I actually have 3 copies of the Whitman variant. And they all, again, have these blank UPC symbols down in the lower hand corner. But then I do have some of the regular Micronauts issue number 1s as well. So, again, you can see the same kind of diamond with the little burst up here on all 3 of these copies. And then the last 2 books that I've shown you, this one and the Avengers book, you actually notice they do something a little bit different up in this corner where they just put the title in a rectangular box. So again, I showed you a handful of books here, a lot of inconsistencies between them. And you do have to take a little bit of time to go through your collection and kind of look at photos that are online and compare it to what you're looking at, because at various points, Marvel actually uses a diamond price tag as well. This one is, you have to compare them. You have to compare them. Like, I could try to verbally explain it, but it is not going to be the same as if you have two copies of the different books in front of you and can kind of bounce back and forth. But again, my big point with this is that the newsstand copies that are selling for high dollars are doing so because they are rare and they are in really great shape. Whitman's on the other end of that spectrum have that same potential. And the big question is, will Whitman variants get their just due? Will they start to be something that folks are hunting for and that folks are willing to pay a premium for because they are as rare, if not more rare, than certain newsstand comics that are out there in the market? So there you have it. Those are essentially my Whitman variants, at least the ones that I was able to find digging in the collection earlier today. I am very much interested in hearing what you all's thoughts are on Whitman variants and whether you think that they could potentially go up in value the same way that we've seen some newsstand comics go up in value over the last few weeks and months. Certainly, if you enjoyed this video, I want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up button. And if you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.